What up, what up, what up, everybody? So, I have the opportunity to bring on the great Rakim Sabree. So, Rakim has been doing such great things. He is an author, a columnist, a financial coach who focuses on the intersection of financial education and the financial trauma as a barrier to achieving financial empowerment. You actually, if you Google this guy, you'll see him all over the place talking about financial trauma. He's been on Experian, he has done TED Talks, he has a book. He's been at FinCon Talks, he's been on Black Enterprise, and actually he's a constant contributor to thegrio.com. And also, I had to add on here because you got to add your credentials sometimes. That he is a certified financial educator, education instructor, and it's also his best-selling book, which is called The Financially Irresponsible. So, how are you doing today, Rakim?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
You're welcome. I mean, sorry to put all your accolades out there, but you've been moving, man. You've been doing a lot of things. So we all here today to talk about financial trauma and ultimately, like, what is that? Because you say that's your message, but what ultimately is financial trauma?
Yeah, so financial trauma has a lot of definitions. I use one that I've created, and it's any instance observed or experienced that has a negative impact on the way that you view, interact with, or believe about money. So that creates quite the spectrum, right? You have um, major traumas like interruptions in your income through being laid off or fired from your job, maybe experiencing a eviction or repossession, and then you have smaller traumas that interact that rather influence how you interact with money. So maybe that's a bad piece of advice you saw on social media about a particular stock pick or cryptocurrency, and so I like to leave room um, in that spectrum because I think all of us experience some aspect of financial trauma at some point in our life, and more than experiencing it once, that it's kind of something that we can continue experiencing throughout our life.
Yeah, because one of the things that I think about all the time is that when it comes to finances, usually we tend to only focus on the things that hurt us when we were younger. And usually around the age 8 is when we lock in most of our financial, you know, goals or financial habits, shall I say, because, I've tried to focus on the habits side of the house to get around a lot of the fears. So, what are some of the things that, or the big traumas that you've encountered with your clients that you've been talking to?
Interestingly, it's this limiting belief set that says either that won't happen for me, or that's not for me, right? In terms of reaching a specific financial goal. I think to your point, when we're younger, excuse me, when we're younger, we get socialized into a kind of a pattern of belief that says, excuse me, that at a certain point, what does a realistic goal look like for us? And I think that this is significantly more true in communities of color, or urban communities where it's kind of like, all right, yeah, maybe, one time you believed in being a doctor, but as you get older, it's like, okay, well, what's the realistic job you can go into? And so when you draw parallels between, how you define realistic and what income opportunity looks like or income potential looks like, I think even at those early ages, there's the foundation of financial trauma there that says, okay, well, I can't do this, so I'm going to settle for something less, and that kind of echoes through really every aspect of the decisions that we make as it relates to how we interact with money. Um, so yeah, I think definitely the limiting beliefs is what I see the most frequently.
Okay, yeah, because one thing that I noticed, I'll just say, I can just talk like how about my mom is it's very funny, but it's like my mom is usually happy with what she has, but just enough. And and I'm not sure if this is a financial trauma. Is inside African American community, or you say black community, black and brown community, is that when you see somebody doing better, they always the one being taxed on handing out because they want to help. Um, and then also you find yourself being broke usually, even though they might be the first time going to college, the first time actually making the most income, but yet they still living in the same lifestyle because they want to help. It's not that they don't want to help and they just don't want to leave anybody else, but I just think like how can we move on or move forward as a society without paying, I guess you could say, quote unquote, that black tax um, as a trauma inside our communities.
It's a really good question. And I don't profess to have the answer, but if I can theorize a little bit, I think some of the burden needs to come off of that like one successful person, and that we normalize what success looks like across the broader sphere of what our community looks like. And then on the other end, I think that there is something to be said about giving back to your community, right? In whatever shape that takes. The problem with this framing, giving back to the community, is that oftentimes that giving back is equated with some kind of monetary exchange. And so, how do we define as a community giving back outside of the lens of me giving you the money that I've worked hard to make? And so, what does that look like? That can look like the sharing of skills. That can look like the sharing of information. That can look like the sharing of network. Especially as someone who accomplishes a certain level of education or notoriety, right? The social circles and influences that you will have access to are likely to be greater than that of the people that you grew up with or around. And so I think broadening our perspective around what giving back looks like, as well as taking the burden off of the one person, right? The exception to the rule, and normalizing what success looks like across the community is probably, in my opinion, the best way to move forward.
Mm, okay. My approach was to just move away, just get a new circle of
And that
friends.
happens. I mean, that's a reality.
Yeah,
but
because
but
it's
I think
like, yeah,
to your point, like what does that then do for the community, right? And so there's like the assimilation into, and it's a difficult place to be in, and I've been in this place,
yeah,
the assimilation into what is the dominant popular white culture, right? That says this is how you define success, and these are the people that you need to be around in order to be successful.
mm,
And the alienation that occurs from the people that you grew up with or around, thinking that you feel like you're better than them because you've accomplished more than they've been able to accomplish. And that's a difficult place to be in, and it's still, I mean, there's aspects of that that I navigate today. I moved away from home,
mm,
and in moving away from home, it was my exposure to banking. It was my exposure to individuals who had purchased property that were close to my age. It was my exposure to conversations about credit and retirement and life insurance and all of those things. And so I don't know that if I would have stayed home, I would have had that same exposure. But I know that having that exposure has been life changing for me. And at the very least, I mean, the lowest hanging fruit, being able to conceptualize and follow through on the purchasing of property. Um, and I haven't moved back home, but I'm not so far away from home that it's like I can't go back. And it's
mm,
not a situation where I haven't gone back. And social media makes the world a little bit smaller in that you can reach out and touch people that are from your previous community and share in the way that I'm, articulating, whatever it might be, through resources, through information, through, I mean, if you want to give money, through money. And now living in this post-COVID world, I mean, the world is even smaller, right? We've all gotten used to Zoom and
yeah.
the online video mediums for communication. So I really don't think that there's an excuse, and that moving away is necessarily the solve anymore.
Uh, yeah, because I'm thinking now as we get older, like you said, the technology kind of bridges that gap. But also, how do we? I know these are big questions, and things that I don't expect us to solve the world problems today. Um, but it's just trying to reach those who feel like they're in a rut because a lot of people feel as though they're broke and they poor and they that's how they grew up. And some people stay in that same mindset and go on that same, as you could say, generational wheel. And trying to break that wheel is kind of where we come in as from understanding from the financial education piece, but not just from the education, but more so the mindset. And as you diving into the psychology of the black and brown people, um, what is it that one thing that is your takeaway to, as you could say, that you saw that was the most motivator to get people going?
I don't know that I understand the question. Can you just rephrase it for me?
Yeah. Um, so what is it that one thing that gets people motivated to start changing their lifestyle?
Um, I'm gonna challenge your question, or rather, the language in your question, because I think motivation is definitely kind of external, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that change comes from within. Um, and so I often talk about, people ask, how do you overcome financial trauma? And I use the three E's, right? The exposure, education, and execution.
Mm,
And so I just think about, my journey and realizing that something exists, right? And that thing that exists was the potential to purchase property, or learning the value of building credit in conjunction with being able to purchase property. Basically, being able to see that something is attainable because somebody else did it. And that's why I think representation really matters, because if I see another millennial black man or black woman do this thing, it's like, oh, wait, to that point of the one successful person, well, how do we normalize this? How do we make this a thing that everybody's doing or that everybody wants to do? So there's that piece. And then there's the education piece, which you touched on, and I'm definitely an advocate for education, particularly financial education. But I just find that financial education falls short in the way that it is delivered, and the way that it's taught to us to then go teach to our communities, right? A lot of people are of the belief that financial education would solve our problem around the wealth gap and what ownership looks like, and just making poor money decisions. But what I've found over the years is that there are people who know that they should be doing better, and people who know that they could be doing better. They know what to do, but they're in a survival modality, or they have a poverty mindset that says, okay, well, I need to make this money stretch until the next paycheck. So what are the things that I'm going to do to make that happen? What are the things that I'm not going to pay for? What are the things that I'm going to pay for? And what are the vices that I have that make this situation a little bit more bearable? I think that variable is often left out of the equation. And so, years ago, I co-founded a nonprofit on the premise of ending homelessness. That was our big goal. And, when we talk about homelessness and kind of deconstructing the stigma that exists around why people end up being homeless, a lot of what comes to mind when you think of a homeless person is somebody who is either addicted to some drug, or addicted to alcohol, or lazy, they don't want to get a job, instead of seeing that there's a series of events, right, a series of backslides that put that person in that position. And so with the $5, $10, $20 that they scrape up, how they navigate their current circumstances through using vices like drugs and alcohol is a very much more realistic um, and human approach to how people end up in that situation than just assuming that, oh, well, because this person has a problem with drugs and alcohol, they're homeless.
Mm,
Um, and homelessness is a spectrum, and I mean, we could have a whole segment on what that looks like, but I think putting that in the frame of people's mental condition, as it relates to money, as it relates to the beliefs that they hold, as it relates to operating in survival. There are instances where, we hear this narrative across social media where the millennials are out buying Starbucks and avocado toast, and if they
avocado
would
toast.
save their money and invest it instead, that they would be able to be millionaires. And that's BS, right? Like, I can enjoy and I don't eat avocado toast, but for the sake of this conversation, right, I can enjoy my avocado toast and my Starbucks and still be focused on building wealth. But what is it that buying my avocado toast and my Starbucks is doing for me in this moment that allows for me to
Mm,
weather maybe the politics game and the microaggressions that I have to deal with in a corporate environment, or the stress of being a full-time entrepreneur, and that maybe that's my little 5 minutes of heaven that allow for me to move on. So I think, in addition to education and the exposure piece, that we need to have empathy. As
mm.
educators, we need to have empathy to where people are, to what they've come out of, and what they believe is possible for themselves in the future.
Okay, so to make sure I get the three E's, can you just reiterate what those are again? In the
So three E's are exposure, education, and execution.
okay, and there's power in each one of those, and each one of them seem like they will take you to that next level.
For
Man,
sure.
how did you come up with these?
Uh, so I have a unique teaching style, right? Very provocative in nature, and so I have a pulse on what catches people's attention, right? How certain phrasing, or literary techniques, right? Alliteration, or whatever works to kind of make things stand out in people's mind. But beyond that, it's been my experience. So, I talk about growing up experiencing poverty, and having witnessed my mom on Section 8 and with food stamps, and believing that, okay, when I get to the age of independence, that I'm going to go out and do that same thing. And
Mm,
so exposure was meeting somebody who was within 5 years of my age who owned property. And it's like, well, hold on a second. If this person can do it, why can't I do it? And then education was learning what it takes to accomplish that thing, because now I know it's attainable. And then execution was taking that thing that I learned and applying it, right? And
mm,
oftentimes, I would go as far as to say almost all the time, right? The execution piece is the hardest, because that's where you have to come face to face with your own limiting beliefs. So, back to your question around motivation, right? Yeah, I can be motivated to go out and do this thing, right? Because somebody else did it, or because I have the education to understand the process. But you know, when I'm worrying about the what if scenarios and how the situation could go wrong, or I'm worried about the real life situation of, potentially losing my income, or not having enough money to cover an emergency, and, you stand that up next to the privilege of somebody else's experience who doesn't have those same concerns, that can stop you in your tracks, no matter
yeah,
how attractive this idea is, or how educated you are on the process, or how motivated you are. And so you really have to do the inner work of silencing, those voices that will take you away from accomplishing that goal. And not everybody is willing to do that, or not everybody is capable of doing that on their own. They might need
mm.
some hand holding, some community building, some support to kind of push them in that direction. And I've been fortunate to have a great support system throughout this journey.
Yeah, because you mentioned having a support system during your TED talk, and the power of having a support system throughout your journey. and the exposure that it provides you. Um, how do you find your support team?
You said, how did I find it?
Yep.
So, so I think it's less about finding and more about like curating, right? Carefully
Mm,
selecting the people that you um, allow to feed you. So who are you having conversations with? What do those conversations sound like? Are they understanding of your aspirations and your goals? Are they encouraging you or are they discouraging you? And a lot of my support systems kind of built in through family. Um, or family that I've chosen, right? People that've been around for a long time and who are just like, you know what? I can't tell you the number of times that somebody in my support system has shared with me, well, Rakim, if anybody can do it, you can. And
mm,
so all of those things matter. And I think it's really kind of holistic, right? I'm not curating this group or the support system just for the purposes of financial gain. These people need to feed the different aspects of my existence, my life. So I think, when given this advice, I think about how networking is taught to people, right? And you're always looking for, well, how can this person benefit me?
right.
And what is the value, right, that I have to present? But sometimes it's not even about looking for, an end, right? Sometimes it's not about looking for an angle. Sometimes it's just organic interactions where people want to see you do well. And I believe that the energy that you put out into the world, you get back. And so I've always kind of strived to be a good person. And I won't say that I've not been burned in some relationships or interactions with people, but those are learning experiences that tell
Yeah.
you the kind of people to stay away from and reaffirm the kind of people that you should have in your corner.
Yeah, having those and that's interesting that you said curate because I do find myself that I try to figure out a way how I can add value. And when I met you at first, I was like, who is this guy? Everybody else knew who you were. I was like, I don't know this guy. It's like, but as I'm starting to learn and start hearing your message a little bit more, I was like, okay, now I see why everybody choose to have you um, in their circle of trust, their circle of um, engagement when it comes to just changing the mindset and actually challenging a lot of people to think a little bit differently than what they do on a day to day. Even inside the financial space, we all kind of get in our own little box sometimes, even though we think it's kind of vast, but it's really not. um, so going back to the trauma side of the house, you talked about being on food stamps. I myself was actually on food stamps for I say like a month just to see how it was. Not to just see how it was, but it was like I was a teacher at the time. They don't make money, so I qualified. I was like, check. So give me some money. I ate good during that time frame, um, but any other time I'm eating like maybe one meal or maybe two, and going through. I know sidestepping here, rambling a little bit, but getting back to my childhood trauma, which was growing up without having the lights on. I remember the days of, we'll go to the grocery store just for AC, or we'll go to the mall because during the summer times, the AC was out, and at night it was a little cooler, so we can actually go to bed and so forth. So my mom used to do that a lot. And then what she would also do is try to make sure she didn't repeat the things that she was brought up with, which was making her own clothes for her brothers and sisters. And so when we got older as kids, she tried to make sure that we weren't bullied in school or picked on in school. So she wanted to make sure she buy us the latest and greatest or work that second or third job to support us. And to the point when I got older, I started working like two or three or four jobs because I was like, well, my mom did it while going to school. And then as I gotten older, I realized like I don't really need all these jobs. I just need a job to make some money. And cut all the time out. And then like I had more time to do the things that I want to do. So how did you actually get beyond your hurdle with your financial trauma that you were going through?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. Um, I've been wrestling with this concept of luck, right?
Mm,
I grew up not believing in luck and being
mm,
told not to believe in luck, and to a degree, I still don't. Like to a large degree, I still don't. But I just think of how fortunate I have been in certain instances to have certain experiences by being in the right place at the right time, and recognizing the right opportunity. And so, my childhood, or not really my childhood, but more so like my teenage years, were difficult, right? Navigating the separation of my parents and what kind of stress and trauma that put on me as the oldest child, and the relationship that I have with my siblings, or the relationship that I had with the other parent, who, in this case is my dad. Um, and then also navigating this financial trauma, right, of becoming aware of the fact that we have food stamps and we have Section 8, and we have to do what we have to do to survive. And so there was very much like a survival mode activated that didn't
mm.
really allow me the space to recognize what all was happening, or to process my feelings. And I don't think that that's something that's unique to me, right? I think that people live that reality every day.
Every
And
day.
for some people, like, they never get a break. They never get the opportunity to sit back and reflect on, well, how did all of this influence the person that I am today? But on the back end of that, I would be remiss if I didn't share that I've had a very strong foundation, and foundational support through my grandfather specifically, as I was growing up, in that, we've done spaces together where I talk about poverty, and, the root of poverty is, an old French word that means a wretched state, right? So poverty is mental. And I often describe my experience as experiencing aspects of poverty. I never say that I was in poverty, right? Or that I
Hmm.
am, you know what I'm saying? Because my
Yeah.
mind was never of a poverty, you know, of poverty in nature, right? There was always a spark. There was always a desire to do more, to be more, to experience more. I just didn't know how to connect those dots. And so there was a point in time where my mom wanted to relocate. She was just like, New York has been great, but I want to try something different.
Right.
And she gave me and my siblings the opportunity to go with her. So she wanted to move across country to Texas, and she said, "Hey, you guys will have a choice. What do you want to do?" And so my siblings decided that they wanted to stay in New York with my father, and I decided that I would go with her to Texas. And it was very scary, choice, right? I'm leaving everything that I know, including my grandfather, who had been such a big part of, you know, who I was at that time and who ultimately I would become. My siblings, who I've always had, been there for. And so really a redefining experience for me, to say the least. But I made that choice, and through making that choice, there was just kind of like a ripple effect of situations that, ultimately landed me on this path, right? I ended up moving to Texas. I was there for 8 months and ended up moving back up north to Connecticut. I needed a job, so I started working in the supermarket, and then I found a job in banking, and then I was doing the supermarket and the banking thing at the same time, and
Yep.
that's
And
when I met
multiple
my
jobs. Yep.
manager, and yeah, that's when I met my manager, and my manager, she hired me, and she was the one who owned the house at the time, and I'm just like, oh, how do we do that? So it's just like, you know what? I'm gonna take a step back, and I'm not gonna call it luck. I'm gonna call it what it is. I believe definitely I've been favored, that my path has been guided, spiritually. I think that spirituality plays a big role in what my success has looked like. It's not luck. I believe everything happens for a reason, And so, taking off the politically correct hat, right, and just saying that um, my path has been guided forever, and I'm just really following that path. And so, believing in whatever, right, the unknown, the unseen, this power that guides our steps, that guides our footsteps. I think that I was put here for a reason, and that all of the work that I've done up until this point um, has been in line with that reason. So that's my answer for what success has looked like for me. But I think that through articulating that experience, what I can share with anybody who's listening or anybody that will listen is that environment matters, right? Recognizing opportunity matters. Taking action on that opportunity matters. But I also think that, your purpose matters. And if you can't see bigger than you, if you can't see your purpose beyond the four walls of your experience or the street corner that you live on, or the neighborhood that you grew up in, then you're doing yourself a disservice, but you're also doing the world a disservice, because the world might need you.
Yeah. So, yeah, because we talked about the environment and moving around, and also, like you said, that unit or those group of people that you select to choose to have in your lifestyle, um, or in your life and around you, and also the fact that you actually kept your family in your circle, and made them part of your life. That's very powerful right there. A lot of people, I guess, in our community usually grow up without seeing their father or being around their father as often. Usually the mom is the one that's left. It's a typical story that we all we all very familiar with. Um, so what is it that would because we do have a lot of people now with children, especially in our age range. What is it that could actually help take those people as they bring up their children to, how can I say? Let me rephrase it, whole thing. How do we even, is there a life without financial trauma? How about that? Because then it dives
Um,
into the generational.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. Not in today's society. With the values that are placed on this consumer economy and capitalism and the way that it exists and the way that it's practiced here in the United States, um, just navigating capitalism as an economic system in the way that it's practiced is a traumatic experience, right?
Yeah.
All day,
Get
every
out. All right.
day, you are being bombarded with advertisement
Violence.
and scarcity, right? That says buy
Yep.
now or
Hmm.
it's going to cost double in 2 weeks, right?
Yep.
Buy now at this discount. And so you're being nudged in the direction of making decisions that ultimately have an impact on your money or your beliefs about money or what your interaction with money looks like. It is influencing the relationships that you have, right? One of the biggest causes of divorce are issues of finance, right?
Yep.
It's interacting, or rather, it's influencing the relationship between parents and their children, right? When you see parents arguing or fighting over child support and what custody looks like. It impacts where you go to school and what you learn. It impacts what kind of job you get when you get out of school. And now the big topic that everybody's talking about is student loan debt and the forgiveness that's going around. But like this whole generation of people who went and took out all of these loans that they had no plan for paying back, other than being told, well, you'll get a good enough job and you'll be able to pay it back, right? And
Right.
how that has an impact on your ability to do other things, right? Like buy property, or if you're not in good standing with your student loans, maybe that has an impact on your credit. The role of credit in everyday decisions, right? Whether or not you can get a job, what your insurance looks like, whether or not you can get a place to live. And so in this current economic system, and I don't know of a better one, right? I don't have a solution other than learning how to play this game and learning how to play it well. But in this current economic system, there is trauma at every turn. So I think the best way to navigate that, particularly as a parent, is to first acknowledge that it exists and then take inventory of how your financial traumas influence your behaviors and your attitudes and your beliefs about money, um, and what your children may or may not mirror from you despite your best effort, right? So you talked about the lengths in which your mom went to make sure that you and your siblings were good, but how seeing that struggle influenced your relationship with working, right? Or I talk about how seeing my mom on Section 8 and food stamps influenced what I aspired for as an independent
Mm,
adult. So we have to be conscious not only in what it is that we say, but what it is that we show. And if we
right.
can't show any better, to articulate why we can't show any better, in that this is what I'm having to do right now, but this is what you should be aspiring to do later. And I think that's huge. I think that, that will go very far.
Yeah. And that's one of the things is that I always try to talk about is that our parents only show us what they're comfortable with doing, not with what they know, because that ultimately helps them to do something that, they're not scared of. So when you come up as a child, be like, well, I just heard about this in school. I want to go do this. And your parents are like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. You'll be sorry you did that. But I wonder if it's they having a flashback of a child like trauma that they feel as though this is something that they need to kind of hold on to and not share this experience with you as a child. So it's one of those interesting topics. I don't know. We dive into a lot of stuff. So one of the things that I'll talk about, or actually, I want to get your opinion on. There is a research that was done that was showing us that financial education inside the household actually helps with poverty because for one, they are able to people who actually are financial literate or actually have a good understanding of money, their children ultimately are able to articulate. They use bigger words, they use more descriptive words. They actually talk about how to grow themselves and instead of without financial literacy inside the household, they notice like they'll show a picture of a dog and the child would just say dog. But a person with financial literacy or something like that, they would notice that the person will say, "Oh, it's a Rottweiler. Oh, it's a Labradoodle." They actually go into detail that way, and so understanding that type of not Scientology, understanding that psychological aspect of finances and a correlation with education. Um, what is your take on teaching the adults versus teaching the children first?
um, I'm gonna blow this question up only because
Right.
that's my style, right? So I don't think that, or rather, I think that poverty is intentional, right? So I don't think that any amount of financial education is going to eradicate poverty because poverty is a necessary part of this economic system, right? There's the haves and the have nots. That said, as a financial educator, I know that that's a really big statement for me to make. And so I'm not downplaying the value of financial education in particularly in underprivileged communities. But when you look at an underprivileged community, you have to ask yourself the question, well, why are they underprivileged, right? Is it just the
Yeah.
refusal to learn how money works? I don't think so, right? Because we know how money works.
Yeah.
It's the fact that we don't have money. It's the
Hmm.
fact that we don't have opportunities to access money. It's the fact that we don't have money being passed down generationally. And so this issue is probably more structural and systemic than it is educational, in that, well, why is money a taboo topic?
Hmm.
Why is there mistrust, particularly in the Black community, as it relates to financial institutions? Why, why, right? There's the rabbit hole of
Yeah.
whys. And so, now going back into your question, having kind of created that context, if you will, it, the question's blown up, right? It doesn't matter who you
Yeah.
teach, right? I was exposed to the stock market and learning about the stock market when I was still in middle school.
Hmm.
But I didn't start investing until after I was 21 years old. Why? Well, I didn't have money to invest,
Yep.
right? And while I was being taught about the stock market, I was also navigating poverty. So,
Hmm.
could that lesson really stick? You're teaching kids about how to invest for their retirement when they're worried about what they're going to eat for dinner, right? So,
Yeah.
um, it's a difficult question to answer, but if I'm going to play by the rules here, I think yes, obviously, the earlier you introduce financial education, the earlier that financial education can take root, and you can start seeing that the exhibition of that learning and the behaviors that children have. You can start teaching them about delayed gratification versus instant gratification. You can start teaching them about trading time for money, or how to avoid trading time for money. You can start teaching them about what long-term planning looks like, whether that be for their education or their retirement. You can take them to the bank and show them, how to make deposits. And I think all of those things are great things. But I don't think that if the legions of Black and brown people in this country started doing that with their children, that automatically going to change or eradicate poverty, because I think
Yeah.
poverty is designed. And so,
It's a
when
capitalist
we talk,
system. I mean,
say again,
it's a capitalist system. It's part of the
yeah,
it's part
it's a
of
part
the
of the design.
society.
So
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it becomes a race for, well, how far away can you get from poverty,
Hmm.
more so than how do we eradicate poverty in the first place. And that opens up, I mean, so many other dialogues, right? When you talk about um, classism
Yep.
and what that might look like within the Black community, what that does look like within the Black community.
We
You
got
talk
it now.
about um, just to your point earlier, does that mean leaving the hood and going into the nice areas, right? The nice areas meaning the white areas, so that your child can get a better education, so that your child can be away from the negative influences that might lead them down a path of destruction. And so I
Hmm.
think it's important to know at this point in the conversation too, that oftentimes when we talk about the Black experience, that a lot of times people equate that with poverty. And there are a lot of thriving Black people, right? Black doesn't mean poverty. Brown doesn't mean poverty. And so, how do we break that illusion of association? Um, I mean, like I said, this can go in so many different directions, and I don't want to take up all of your
You
time
good?
talking about that rabbit hole, but I think it's so much more sophisticated than, do we introduce financial education as children or as an adult?
Yeah, because one of the those rabbit holes of the why, and I think a lot of us in the financial space don't spend enough time in the why because we talk about do this, you'll get these results. It's almost like we talking about it like a fitness instructor. Like you see the biggest loser, the reason why it's so impactful is because they talk about the why. Why did you get this far? Like, or how did this even happen? How did you level like wind up in this particular situation to then now let's okay, now that we understand your why, well, like how you got here, now understand like, okay, why do you still live with this? And they usually say you walking around with like 200 pounds of weight on you, we're gonna have you run in 200 additional pounds. And then as they lose the weight, it's like, remember you used to weigh this and move with this weight on them to the point now it's like we like I say, I'm noticing that a lot of the financial people are it's just going down that route, and I don't want to go that route because I have a belief that we need to actually sit down and actually have these conversations. You and I, we saw at FinCon that it was only like what maybe 400 of us out of a $3,000 conference. I mean, not $3,000, but a 300 person conference, and to understand that yes, we are minority in that particular situation, but also we are people of color that come from almost similar backgrounds that either A, took ourselves out of the environment that we were in, and now we're still trying to figure out how do we reach more. And I think that was a common message across all of us. It's like, how do we reach more people to get themselves out of their trauma, out of their rut that they're in, and change their mindset. For me personally, I actually talk about the habit side of the house because that's the side of fear, is to start building habits. Let's keep going. Let's figure out a way that you can kind of something that you can stick to. If you don't want rotten teeth falling out, all right, you're gonna build a habit to brush your teeth. That's the goal. Um, and then from the trauma side, and this is the reason why I love your message and I appreciate everything that you're doing, which is bringing the light to the financial space, which is covered by mostly white males when we think about finances. Like when you think about the rich person, you always think about like a older white guy, but we don't talk about some of the black people that are rich as well. Um, and then understanding it's like, hey, well, why you have this opportunity, which goes back to your luck. I'm sorry, I'm summarizing everything that you just encompassed here,
No,
but
you
we
keep it
dived into
going.
everything. We go. So it goes to like understanding of all right, now that we starting to see more people, more black people or more people of color talking about finances, now that we starting to have more open discussions around the table, even at the cookouts. Like for me personally, like everybody knows when I'm showing up at a cookout or someplace, I'm down to talk about budgeting. I'm down to talk about money all day long. Some different strategies that they could use, or different strategies that are out there, or taxes that are coming up. Like all these things to now it's common. It's not, oh, I don't want to talk to him because that's all he want to talk about. Yeah, we can shoot the stuff or whatever, but ultimately, where I'm at. Like, don't talk to me because you decided not to go down the path we put a plan together. You decided to go against the grain, and now you're going back to where you started from again. So then you lose friends that way, but they don't want to talk to you. It's fine. It's fine. But it's like I wonder if we are a glutton for trauma. And you wrote about that. I was looking at this article that you wrote back in 2021 that says how Black trauma may be impacting the way we spend money. And I'm gonna share that with everybody so everybody can see this because I think it's and also so you can remember. I know it's been a long time ago. Pull that up. All right, so there you go. If you can see it. Um, so you wrote this back in wow, it's almost a year ago. On the Grio. And one of the things that you talked about was just off the first rip, like you just giving it in, it just you don't play games. So acknowledging the issues around the lack of financial literacy is one problem, but it's not the only issue that impacts Black dollars. As financial empowerment coach, I've been leaning into a less popular, but arguably a most impactful aspect of financial education, and that's the money mindset. I'm reading this because when I put this for audio, people can actually understand what it is. So, um, And then before you answer that question, I wanted to say hi to the folks that are here. We'll say, hey, Mama Barbara, good seeing you. Thanks for joining. Hey, Carla and D3, thank you guys for coming through. So you're talking about this mindset. So where did, I mean, just off the topic, um, the title alone, what is the black trauma?
Um, I mean that's a rabbit hole in and of itself, right? Just
We got a
the
lot of
black
rabbit holes,
experience,
man.
right? Yeah, there is,
Yes.
and but I think that's the problem, right? We don't talk about it. It's just like, oh, it's too much to get into, or we don't want to, pull the race card, or we want to be PC and kind of like forget about it, right? Forget about the past, but the past is very relevant and continues to surface in our present. So foundationally, in this work that I've done, um, while I was writing my book, Financially Irresponsible, I was reading the book Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy, which was her thesis work, um, where she talks about the post traumatic stress being passed down generationally from slavery in this country, and then going into Jim Crow, and then just continuing, right? There's just been like this barrage, and that we talked about earlier today, um, how some people never get a break in their lifetime.
Yeah.
But when you extend that out over generations, and and Dr. DeGroy can point to how that generational trauma then resurfaces in each generation afterwards. We realize, going back to that question that you asked me, right? We realize that the education doesn't address or doesn't heal those wounds.
Right.
And so black trauma, and the way that you asked the question, right, is varied, right? It's the experience of having to survive today. It's the experience of our ancestors having to survive yesterday. It's the deep uh, damage to our identity in this country from slavery, right? The stripping of language and culture and religion and names, and
Yeah.
then the brutal abuse, like physical and psychological abuse that we had to endure over the course of that time, that continues to, I don't want to say haunt us because it's not a haunting, but it continues to afflict us in the way that we interact with one another today, right? In the way that we interact with other Black businesses, in the way that, I talked about the limiting beliefs in the beginning of this conversation, in the way that we believe what is possible for us today. And then, as I got deeper into this work, I picked up the book, The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson, which I believe was also his thesis work. And he was the founder of Black History Week, which turned into Black History Month, talking about how we are intentionally socialized from the time that we start school through our entire lives, going up into corporate America and beyond, to believe or to accept this idea of Black inferiority in comparison to everybody else.
Mm.
So not only are we dealing with generational traumas from years previous, right, from generations previous, but we're also dealing with the trauma of being told that you are undesirable, you are the lowest rung of the ladder socially, you are worthless, you are not educated, you do not deserve to have money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But also having everybody else in the world be socialized to believe the same thing. And so not only is it a self-fulfilling prophecy in that we accept this Black inferiority, but it's this imposed belief on us by people who are not Black, that says you are the lowest rung on the ladder, right? You are not worthy of respect. You're not worthy of protection. You're not worthy of safety. You're not worthy of love. You're not worthy of wealth. And so, you put all of that into a bowl and everything else that comes with it, and you ask me a question. You ask me a question, and I'm not coming at you, but I'm just saying you ask me a question
No,
of
you're good.
what is Black trauma, right? Well, that's Black
Right.
trauma. Being Black is
It's trouble. Yes. Tell me about it. And then there's also, yeah, we can go more into that. That's a whole nother podcast. Because it's like colorism within the black community and so forth. Because my mom is here, and you wouldn't even know that she's my mom. She's a lot lighter than I am. So, mom, she says, "Hi, everyone. Great people have to want and hunger for financial independence." I know she's using her cell phone to type this in, so I ain't going to judge her on the context, but I know what she means. It's like you have to really want it and actually to put effort into making it happen. Um, Ma, you on it today. All right, I like it. With no drinks. We got Jamal in here. Thank you for coming on, sir. We didn't do the drink session, but I know you just put the baby away. It's cool. Right. All right. You got a quick second for Poddex?
Say it again.
Yeah, a moment for Poddex?
I don't know what that is, but yeah, I got
You
time.
know
Let's
this?
go.
Okay. You just gonna go. All right, let's hold on. Let's get this going.
This episode is powered by Poddex. Poddex are unique interview questions and episode starting prompts in the palm of your hand. So whether you're a new podcaster or existing broadcaster looking to grow your audience and have more meaningful conversations, you're going to want to check out Poddex. Now, if you want to get 10% off your order right now, you can go to poddex.com and type in coupon code. What's the code? Yes, that's the code. Check out poddex.com. Take your podcast to the next level.
All right, you guys. So y'all know. So when it comes to Poddex, just use the promo code Wallet, and you actually get 10% off your first order. It's on the store. You get the physical decks that I got up here, or you get the digital one. Also, it's on the phone. So the question that I have for you, out of this deck, it's called the WTF deck, and it says, "What is a crazy event that you have ever been to?"
What is a what? I didn't hear the
The
question.
craziest event that you've ever been to. What is
Um,
the craziest event you ever been to?
I guess that depends on how you define crazy, right? I'm searching through my memory things very quickly. So there was a time I was brought to a club. I was still living in New York at the time,
Hmm.
and I had been drinking, so I really didn't know which way was up. But it was like this. It was during that period of time where Jersey Shore was really popular, and
I
it
do.
was like some techno like bro club, and I'm sitting there with no money, drunk in the club, watching all of these guys dancing and taking their shirt off and posing and fist bumping, and I'm like, where am I? Like, what am I even doing here? It was the most miserable time ever. And I'm just like, how did I even get here? I don't even remember how I got home, to be honest. But
Right.
yeah, that was pretty crazy for me.
Nice. I have to say the one time my craziest place was went to Miami. Me and my buddies, we were just kind of like hanging out and just bar hopping. Didn't think anything of it. Went into one bar, and the next thing you know, somebody walked past in all patent leather. It was like, what? And then next thing you know, other people on poles and cages started coming out the ceiling. It was like, deuces, we out of here. Like, yeah, that was the craziest that I ever been. Um, for those type of places. But yeah. All right. So I think we can pretty much wrap it up because it's hit that 1 hour mark. Is there anything? Because I usually do this for the interview, for the pre-recorded stuff, um, which is I ask this question: where do you see yourself in the next 2 years?
I see myself doing what I'm doing now, just bigger and better. I built a nice digital brand for myself. I like to see that continue to grow. I like to see myself go on a book tour, and some future book that I create. I like to see definitely all monetizable, activities, right? So not doing any work for free that I don't want to. Doing a lot more speaking, impacting more people's lives, and I see that happening definitely within 2 years. So I'll keep my foot on the gas and keep doing this work.
Awesome. So I asked that question because every person that came on the show that answered that question usually achieve it within the first 6 months. So, and that's the power of actually putting it out there in the universe and being on the show. Just say it. So we do have one question that came in last minute, looks like. So this is Jessica Kennedy. We actually met on a cruise. That's pretty cool. Her and her husband, awesome people. But they said on here is that I think it's hard to know where to start to break away from financial trauma. The obvious is good to school, go to school, get good grades, go to college, get a career, but still land you into a paycheck. Oh, into like a, I guess, living paycheck to paycheck. And I think we kind of dove into that, which was talking about how to, um, education isn't enough. And I think that's what you and I were just talking about a little bit more. Unless you want to expand on her comment here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to blow up that illusion, right? That you have to go to school, get a good job, take out the student loans, all that stuff, live paycheck to paycheck. And that's where I think financial education, it does have a benefit, right? If you can learn how to take the money that you are making and make that money work for you through investing, through saving, through budgeting, to your point, through leveraging credit responsibly, you can kind of carve yourself out an existence that looks like not being paycheck to paycheck, right? Um, I think this entire conversation was definitely necessary, but I don't want it to be viewed as discouraging financial education or the pursuit of a financial education. I think it's important to recognize history. I think it's important to recognize culture. I think it's important to meet people where they are and lead with empathy. But I don't think that those things should stop you or act as obstacles that you can't maneuver around or through in your pursuit of financial independence. And so, I think that that's a really great question. But focusing on this idea of the accumulation of assets, again, learning how to play the game, right? The accumulation of
Yeah.
assets, limiting the liabilities unless your assets are paying for those liabilities, paying yourself first, learning, the right places to put your money, right? Understanding what risk tolerance looks like, understanding what market cycles and fluctuations look like, being able to understand your emotions as it relates to money and how those emotions influence the decisions that you make financially. All of those things are important. But my presence in this space is definitely more geared towards the conversation that we had and saying, hey, this is a big part of the equation that we're not talking about, that we need to be
Yeah.
talking about, because you can't get on this stage or on this podcast or in this venue and tell me that as a black man, I need to pull myself up by my bootstraps. right? And
Right.
so this is the history of why I don't have bootstraps to pull myself up by, and I'm doing the best that I can with what I have. And then I think that creates an avenue for other Black financial creators to then do the educating piece in saying, okay, now that we know the history, now that we know the lay of the land, let me put you onto the game. This is how we navigate through playing that game while acknowledging that those obstacles exist.
Man, I really wish my stuff was connected. Cause that's definitely a round of applause on that one, sir. It's like mic drop Eric. Because you do hear about that, but in this financial space, and you hear that often. And honestly, my mom was, and this is was one of those women who were dealing with that check and actually the lights being cut off, and I don't even think she was saving at the time. It was just trying to pay bills, with a household of five people. She's just trying to make it happen. So, and I know Jessica's going through something similar, but we not similar in the sense of like I'm not sure what her financial markup is, but you got a kid, you got a husband, and you're trying to make life happen. For your kids to make sure your kids have the best um, that you can offer them with what you have, and trying to get to that next level. Granted, you hear a lot of people talk about this stuff, like, "Hey, save a little, save this." It's like if you really sit down and think about it, you really need that seed money. And I talked about it a little bit, but you need that seed money. That seed money can be $1 a paycheck until you get comfortable. Then you start moving up to $5. See what that look like, and start moving in that direction. You just got to get comfortable. Start building those habits up. Start building those, like I said, the strong financial habits. This is all I talk about. You got to think about how can you start small, and once you understand how to handle the small stuff, when the money pours in, you already know where that money's going at. So I had to answer that one. I mean, unless Rakim, you got anything additional on that one?
Nope, I think we covered
Okay.
it.
Sweet. All right. I think I have answered everything. So Rakim, where can the people actually find out more about you?
So I'll point people to my website. That's rahkimsabree.com. On my website, and I just redesigned it, so I made it a lot more user friendly, and you can find everything that you need, my social media, email, anybody wanting to work with me one-on-one, anybody wanting to hire me to speak. My Substack is on there, Overcoming Financial Trauma. It's a free version and a paid version, so I definitely would encourage people to check that out. I send out one email a week on Fridays discussing financial trauma and its various manifestations. So the website address for that is rahkimsabree.substack.com. Um, and then all of my social medias are my name at Rahkim Sabree, and I'm everywhere people are, right? Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, you name it. I'm there at Rahkim Sabree.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much, Rakim, for coming on to the show, sharing your knowledge, and actually pouring back into the people about the financial traumas that we go through. Hopefully, I spelled your name correctly for the, for the website.
You did.
But everybody, all right, everybody. So make sure you guys start having these conversations around the dinner table. The holidays are around the corner. Actually, the holidays are always happening. You got birthdays, you got cookouts. Everybody's doing something. You got baby showers. You need to have these conversations about the trauma around having kids, the traumas of actually bringing in another generation. How are you actually feeling? Start having those conversations about how are you doing, instead of just the situation looks dire. Just ask the person how are they doing themselves. They can decide to tell you how they got to where they are, and then how you can actually support them in their efforts on where they want to be. And not always have to be financially, but you could just be a shoulder to lean on. All right. So I just want to leave you all here today is that whatever you get, make sure that you share this thing, like, subscribe. I know you hear this all the time, but it really helps the show grow, and I can bring on more people like Rakim and so many others that you have witnessed on the show. So I want to thank you all today for coming through. All right, y'all have a good night. And my outro music, if I can find it.